Welcome, traveler of dark tales. Before you descend into the fog-shrouded streets of Inverwick, before you learn what horrors lurk behind amber golden light, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this from your home in Lagos, London, Los Angeles, or anywhere in between, drop your location in the comments below. I want to know where in the world this story will haunt you tonight. Are you listening alone in the dark? With friends? Under the covers with a flashlight like the old days? And if this tale of cursed sight and forbidden knowledge sends chills down your spine, subscribe, ***. More horror awaits in the shadows, more cursed artifacts, more villages with terrible secrets, more stories that will make you grateful for the ignorance we take for granted. This is a story about the price of seeing too much, about knowledge that poisons the mind, about a young woman who sacrificed everything to save her village from an ancient hunger that feeds on secrets. It's a story in 3 episodes, each one darker than the last. So hit that subscribe button, tell me where you're watching from, and let's begin. The November mist is waiting, the eye is watching, and once you look into it, you can never unsee what it shows you. Are you ready? The November mist clung to Inverwick like a shroud, seeping through the cracks of timber-framed houses and settling in the lungs of its inhabitants. It was the kind of fog that made a man question what lurked beyond arm's reach, the kind that swallowed sound and returned only whispers. Dr. Alistair Morven pulled his woolen coat tighter as his carriage rattled over the cobblestones leading into the village square. He had traveled from Edinburgh, answering a letter from the town's aging physician, Dr. Angus MacLeod, who spoke of an unusual outbreak requiring a second opinion. The letter had been vague, almost deliberately so, mentioning only a condition of the mind that manifests in the flesh. The village itself appeared frozen in time. Thatched roofs sagged under the weight of perpetual dampness. The kirk's stone spire pierced the gray sky like an accusing finger. Faces appeared in windows as his carriage passed, pale and drawn, watching with expressions that suggested more fear than curiosity. Dr. MacLeod's residence stood at the edge of the square, a respectable stone house with smoke curling from its chimney. The elderly physician met him at the door, and Alistair was struck by how much the man had aged since they'd last met at a medical conference 5 years prior. MacLeod's hair had gone completely white, and deep lines carved his face into a map of worry. "Morven," MacLeod said, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Thank God you've come. I feared you might think me mad from my letter." "Your letter was intriguing enough to warrant investigation," Alistair replied, stepping into the warmth of the house. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of peat smoke mixed with something medicinal, carbolic acid, perhaps, or laudanum. MacLeod poured them both whiskey without asking, his hands trembling slightly. "Before I show you the patients, I must tell you what happened. 3 weeks ago, a traveling merchant came through Inverwick, foreign fellow, dark-skinned, spoke with an accent none could place. He set up in the square, selling curiosities, trinkets from the Orient, he claimed." Alistair sipped his whiskey, noting how MacLeod's gaze kept drifting to the window, as if expecting something. Among his wares was a wooden box, intricately carved. Inside, preserved in some solution, was a human eye. Not just any eye, mind you. It was unnaturally large, the iris, a peculiar shade of amber shot through with veins of gold. The merchant claimed it belonged to a prophet from ancient Mesopotamia, one who could see into men's souls. "Surely no one believed such nonsense," Alistair said. MacLeod's laugh was bitter. "You'd think not. But the merchant offered demonstrations. He'd hold the box before someone, and then he'd tell them their secrets. Private things, shameful things, things no stranger could possibly know." A chill ran down Alistair's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Parlor tricks, cold reading, perhaps research done beforehand. That's what I thought," MacLeod interrupted, "until he stood before me and told me about the child, the one I delivered 30 years ago, born twisted and wrong, that I smothered rather than let it suffer. No one knew, Morven, not even my wife. I told everyone it was stillborn. Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Outside, The fog pressed against the windows like something alive and curious. "What happened to the merchant?" Alistair finally asked. "Gone the next morning. Left before dawn, most say. But he sold that cursed box to someone first." MacLeod stood abruptly, pacing to the window. That's when people started falling ill. It began with Agnes Drummond, the minister's daughter. She was found in her room, curled on the floor, whimpering. When they got her to speak, she said only one thing: "It knows." "Where is she now?" "In the kirk. We've converted the cellar into a— well, you'll see." The walk to the kirk took them through streets, unnaturally quiet for late afternoon. A few villagers hurried past, heads down, avoiding eye contact. Alistair noticed that many windows had been covered with heavy curtains, and more than one door bore a crude symbol drawn in what looked like blood, a circle with a line through it, topped by a triangle. "What are those marks?" he asked. "Protection symbols. Old superstitions bubbling back up. The villagers think." MacLeod trailed off, shaking his head. "Think what?" "That the eye is still watching, that it moves from house to house in the night, looking through walls, reading thoughts, that whoever looks into it goes mad from having their every secret laid bare." The kirk was a stern building of gray stone, its small graveyard crowded with tilting headstones. Reverend Drummond met them at the door, a gaunt man with eyes that held barely suppressed panic. "Dr. MacLeod. And you must be Dr. Morven from Edinburgh. Thank you for coming, though I fear it may be too late for my Agnes." His voice cracked on his daughter's name. They descended into the cellar via a narrow stone staircase. The temperature dropped with each step, and the smell of human waste and fear grew stronger. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows on walls that wept with moisture. 5 cells had been fashioned from old storage rooms, their doors reinforced with iron bars. 3 were occupied. Agnes Drummond sat in the farthest cell, her back against the wall, knees drawn to her chest. She couldn't have been more than 20, with lank brown hair hanging over her face. When they approached, she looked up, and Alistair had to suppress a gasp. Her eyes, there was something wrong with them. The irises seemed to ripple, the color shifting between brown and that same unsettling amber he'd heard described. But worse was her expression, a mixture of terror and an awful knowing. "Agnes," her father called softly, "these doctors have come to help you." She began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass. "Help? How can they help when I can see?" Her gaze fixed on Alistair. "When I can see everything?" "What do you see, Agnes?" MacLeod asked gently. Her laughter stopped abruptly. When she spoke again, her voice was flat, mechanical. "I see the doctor from Edinburgh, Dr. Alistair Morven. I see his wife, Margaret, in their home on Royal Mile. I see how he found her last month, in their bed, with his colleague, Dr. Pierce. I see how he said nothing, how he pretends each day that his world hasn't shattered, how he wonders if he's a coward for not confronting them, how he sometimes wishes they were both dead." The cellar spun around Alistair. His mouth went dry. Those were thoughts he'd shared with no one, thoughts he'd barely admitted to himself in the darkest hours of night. "How?" he whispered. "How could you possibly? I see you," Agnes said, and her eyes were definitely amber now, definitely wrong. "The eye showed me how to see. It opened something in my mind, and now I can't close it. Every person I look at, I see their thoughts, their memories, their shames. Every moment of every day, 1,000 voices screaming their secrets in my head." She started screaming then, hands clutching her temples, rocking back and forth. The other patients took up the cry, and the cellar filled with an unholy chorus of madness. MacLeod pulled Alistair away as Reverend Drummond tried to calm his daughter. They stumbled back up the stairs, gulping the foggy air like drowning men. "Now you understand," MacLeod said. "This is no ordinary ailment. 5 people have been afflicted so far. All of them claim the same thing, that they looked into that damned eye, and now they can see into others' minds. But the gift is a curse. The human mind wasn't meant to bear such knowledge." Within days, They can no longer distinguish their own thoughts from those they perceive in others. They retreat into themselves, screaming about the weight of all that unwanted knowing. Alistair's scientific mind rebelled against what he'd witnessed, searching for rational explanations. Hysteria. Mass delusion. Agnes couldn't have known about what she said. She must have overheard gossip, made a lucky guess. She knew about the child I killed, MacLeod said quietly. The next patient, James Kerr, told his wife about the money he'd embezzled from the estate he manages. He knew the exact amount, where he'd hidden the ledgers, everything. His wife confirmed it all. How do you explain that? Alistair had no answer. That night, in the room MacLeod had prepared for him, Alistair couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to Agnes's words, to the impossible accuracy of her revelations. He'd told no one about Margaret's infidelity. There was no way a minister's daughter from a remote Scottish village could have known, unless he sat up, lighting a candle. The rational part of his mind insisted there had to be an explanation. Perhaps the merchant had been a confidence trickster with a network of informants. Perhaps the eye was merely a prop, and the real mechanism was something more mundane, blackmail, perhaps, or some form of hypnosis that made subjects reveal their own secrets. But the irrational part, the part that believed in his grandmother's stories of second sight and fairy folk, whispered that some things existed beyond the reach of natural philosophy. A sound from outside drew him to the window. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to a few feet. Through that gray murk, he thought he saw movement, a figure, perhaps, or merely a shifting of the mist. Then he saw it. A light, amber gold, floating at roughly the height of a man's face. It moved with purpose, drifting along the street below, pausing at windows. Where it passed, he heard sounds crying, shouting, prayers spoken in desperate whispers. His rational mind offered explanations. A lantern, a will-o'-the-wisp, swamp gas. But he knew, with a certainty that bypassed reason, what he was looking at. The eye was hunting. A knock at his door made him jump. MacLeod entered without waiting for an answer, his nightshirt hastily tucked into his trousers. "There's been another one," he said grimly. "Sarah Fletcher. Her husband found her an hour ago, cowering in their cellar, claiming she'd looked into the golden eye when she went to close the shutters. She's asking for the reverend, saying she needs to confess her sins before they're broadcast to the entire village." They dressed quickly and hurried through the fog-choked streets. The Fletcher home was a modest cottage near the edge of the village. Inside, they found chaos. Sarah Fletcher was a woman of perhaps 40, known for her stern demeanor and religious devotion. Now she babbled like a child, her husband trying ineffectually to calm her. When she saw Alistair and MacLeod, her eyes went wide. Those same eyes, Alistair noted with growing dread, already showing traces of amber. "I see you," she whispered. "Both of you, all your hidden things. Doctor." "MacLeod, you're afraid you're going mad, that perhaps you imagined the child all those years ago, that your guilt has conjured this curse. And you, Doctor Morven, you're wondering if you've come to help or to hide, if perhaps you're hoping this mystery will delay your return to Edinburgh and the confrontation you fear." She began to weep. "I see everyone now. Mrs. Campbell across the way, who poisoned her first husband for his money. Young Thomas Reed, who set the fire that killed the Miller family and let another take the blame. Reverend Drummond." She clapped her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with horror at what she nearly revealed. "What about the Reverend?" MacLeod asked sharply. "I can't," she moaned. "I can't say it, but I can't not know it. It's in my head, all their secrets, all their sins, and I can't make it stop. Please, make it stop." Her husband, a large man who worked at the mill, grabbed Alistair's coat. "Help her. You're a doctor. You must be able to do something." But Alistair had no answers. He administered laudanum to help her sleep, but he knew it was merely postponing the inevitable descent into madness that had claimed the others. As dawn broke, gray and cheerless, Alistair and MacLeod sat in the latter's study, exhaustion making their faces haggard. "We need to find that box," Alistair said. "The eye itself. Whatever is causing this, it seems to emanate from that object. If we can locate it, perhaps we can destroy it." "I've tried," MacLeod replied. "Asked everyone in the village. No one admits to buying it, though someone clearly did. And even if we found it, how do we know destroying it would help? It might make things worse." A horrible thought occurred to Alistair. "The merchant, do we know for certain he left? Or is that merely what people assumed?" MacLeod's face paled. "You think he's still here? But why would he remain?" "I don't know. He's still. Man. Mine. Well face. In the prosody. Mine. In the ruther. Drompatter. But I think we need to find out more about him. Someone must remember more details, where he claimed to be from, where he was staying, anything." They spent the day interviewing villagers, piecing together fragments of information. The merchant had been dark-skinned, possibly Middle Eastern or Indian. He'd spoken English with a heavy accent. He'd worn fine clothes despite his profession, and there'd been something unsettling about his smile, too wide, showing too many teeth. He'd stayed at the village inn for 3 nights, though the innkeeper, a rotund woman named Mrs. Baird, was reluctant to speak of him. "He made me nervous," she admitted when pressed. "The way he looked at folks, like he could see right through them. And he never slept, far as I could tell. I'd wake in the night and hear him moving about his room, talking to himself in some strange language." "Did he leave anything behind?" Alistair asked. "Not as such. Though," she hesitated, "there was a smell in his room after he left. Spices, maybe, or incense, and marks on the floor. We scrubbed and scrubbed, but they wouldn't come out. Still there, if you want to see." The inn's upper floor held 3 small rooms for travelers. The one the merchant had occupied was at the end of the hall. Mrs. Baird was right about the smell. Something exotic and vaguely unsettling hung in the air. The marks on the floor formed a pattern around where the bed stood. Alistair recognized some elements from his study's symbols used in ceremonial magic, though he'd always dismissed such things as superstition. Here, though, etched into the wooden floorboards with what looked like burned into the grain itself, they seemed more sinister. MacLeod knelt to examine them. "This is a binding circle, or a summoning circle, perhaps. But for what?" A voice from the doorway made them both jump. "For the eye, of course." They turned to find an old woman standing there, bent with age, her face a maze of wrinkles. This was Moira McTavish, the village's eldest resident, rumored to have the second sight. "I warned them not to buy it," she said, shuffling into the room. "Told them no good would come of trafficking with such things. But greed makes fools of even wise men." "You know who bought it?" Alistair asked urgently. "Aye, and I know where it is now." Her rimy eyes fixed on him. "But knowledge has a price, Doctor. Everything has a price." That merchant, he understood that. The eye, it demands payment for the sight it gives. "What payment?" MacLeod demanded. "Sanity, first, then life. Those who look into it don't just go mad. You see, they're being consumed. The eye feeds on their minds, grows stronger with each victim. Soon it won't need the box. Soon it will see everything, know everything, and will all be laid bare before it." "That's impossible," Alistair protested, even as doubt gnawed at him. Moira laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "You've seen what you've seen, and still you deny? You learned men and your science. Some things exist beyond your philosophies, Doctor. Some hungers are older than your reason. Tell us who has it," MacLeod pleaded. "Please, Moira. People are dying." "Not dying yet," she corrected. "But they will. Tonight, I think. When the fog is thickest, that's when it will take them all, those who've looked into its depths. It will drink their minds dry and move on to fresh victims." She turned to leave, then paused. "If you want to find it, look to the one who wanted most to see. The one whose curiosity outweighed their wisdom. You'll find it in the place where secrets are confessed. With that cryptic statement, she shuffled away, leaving them with more questions than answers. The place where secrets are confessed, Alistair repeated. The kirk? The Reverend's study, perhaps? MacLeod's face had gone ashen. Or the confessional itself. But this is a Presbyterian kirk. We don't have confession booths. Then where? Alistair stopped, understanding dawning. Unless Reverend Drummond does. Some ministers maintain the practice privately, hearing confessions in their studies. If he's been keeping secrets. If he bought the eye, thinking it would help him root out sin in his congregation. MacLeod finished. God help us all. They ran through the fog-shrouded streets to the kirk. The building stood silent, its doors locked. MacLeod pounded on them until the Reverend appeared, looking haggard. "What is the meaning of this?" Drummond demanded. "We need to search your study," Alistair said. "Now, I'll do no such thing. This is God's house, and I'll not have it desecrated by—" "It's here, isn't it?" MacLeod interrupted. "The eye. You bought it. You thought you could use it to purify your congregation, to root out sin. But it's consuming them instead, and you've been too frightened or too proud to admit what you've done." The Reverend's face crumbled. He aged 10 years in an instant, shoulders sagging. "I only wanted to help," he whispered, "to know their true hearts, to guide them better. But it showed me things, terrible things, about everyone, about myself. Where is it?" Alistair demanded. Drummond led them inside, through the nave to his study. There, on a shelf behind his desk, sat an ornate wooden box, no larger than a prayer book. It was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the lamplight, forming shapes that hurt to look at directly. "I've tried to destroy it," Drummond said. "I've tried to throw it in the lock, to burn it, but I can't. Every time I try, I find myself putting it back, unable to let it go. It won't release me." Alistair approached the box slowly. Even from several feet away, he could feel something radiating from it, not heat, but a presence. A weight of attention that made his skin crawl. "Don't open it," MacLeod warned. "Whatever you do, don't look inside." But Alistair had to know. His scientific training, his need to understand, overrode his fear. His hand reached for the lid. "Doctor!" "No!" Drummond cried. The box opened. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was the eye. It was exactly as described, too large, the color wrong, veins of gold threading through amber. But it was the sense of it being aware that froze Alistair's blood. It wasn't just preserved tissue. It was watching. And then it was inside his mind. Thoughts that weren't his own flooded his consciousness. He saw Margaret, saw her affair not just from his own anguished perspective, but from hers, the loneliness, the resentment, the guilt. He saw Dr. Pierce's duplicity, his casual cruelty. He saw his own weakness, his cowardice, magnified, and reflected back at him. But it didn't stop there. The eye showed him MacLeod's torment, the screaming baby he'd suffocated, the decades of guilt. It showed him Drummond's secret, the lust he felt for his own daughter, the self-loathing that drove him to religious extremism. It showed him the sins of every person in Inverwick, a cascade of cruelty, betrayal, and hidden darkness that threatened to drown him. And beneath it all, feeding on it all, was something vast and hungry. The eye wasn't just perceiving, it was consuming, growing stronger with each mind it touched, each secret it devoured. Alistair tried to close the box, but his hands wouldn't obey. The eye held him, drinking in his thoughts, his memories, his self. He felt his identity beginning to dissolve, merging with the accumulated knowledge stolen from others. Then MacLeod was there, slamming the box shut, dragging Alistair away. The connection severed, leaving him gasping on the floor. "I told you not to look!" MacLeod shouted, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Alistair's mind reeled. He'd looked into the eye, but only for a few seconds. The others, Agnes, Sarah, James, they'd stared for minutes. No wonder they'd gone mad. "We have to destroy it," he gasped. "Tonight, before it takes the others completely." "How?" Drummond asked. "I've tried everything." Alistair forced himself to think, to push past the residual horror of what he'd experienced. The merchant had performed rituals in his room. The symbols on the floor had been a binding circle. If the eye had been summoned, perhaps it could be banished. The marks at the inn, he said. We need to reverse them. Perform a counter-ritual. Do you know how? MacLeod asked. No, but I know someone who might. They found Moira McTavish in her cottage at the village's edge, sitting before a peat fire as if she'd been expecting them. You looked, she said to Alistair without turning around. Foolish man. Now you're looked. Marked, same as the others. It will come for you tonight. Then help us stop it, Alistair pleaded. You know the old ways. Tell us how to banish it. She was silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. The eye is ancient. It belonged to a seer who saw too much, knew too much. When he died, his eye was preserved, and something attached itself to it. A spirit of hunger that feeds on knowledge, on the intimate thoughts of mankind. It's been passed down through the centuries, destroying everyone who possesses it. How do we stop it? MacLeod demanded. You must sever its connection to this world. Return it to the void from which it was called. But the ritual requires a sacrifice, a mind freely given to replace the minds it has stolen. The implications hung in the air like the fog outside. No, Drummond said. I won't allow it. There must be another way. There isn't, Moira said flatly. Someone must offer themselves willingly. Their consciousness will be consumed, but it will satisfy the eye's hunger long enough for the binding to be broken. Then it can be destroyed. I'll do it, Alistair said immediately. No, MacLeod gripped his shoulder. You have a life in Edinburgh, a wife. A wife who betrayed me, Alistair said bitterly. Then, more softly, I've seen inside that thing, MacLeod. I know what it's doing, what it will do if we don't stop it. I looked when I shouldn't have. Let me make that right. There may be another way, Moira said slowly. If you can gather all those who've looked into the eye, their combined will might be enough to resist its pull while the reversal is performed. But you must act tonight, before the fog thickens. That's when it's strongest. They had hours then, maybe less. The plan was desperate but clear. They would bring all the victims to the kirk, the only building large enough and, perhaps, holy enough to offer some protection. Moira would prepare the reversal ritual, using the symbols from the inn as a guide. When the eye came hunting, they would face it together. If they failed, the entire village would likely fall victim to its hunger by morning. As night fell and the fog rolled in, thick as wool, they gathered in the kirk's cellar. Agnes, Sarah, James, and two others, Robert Campbell and young Mary Reed, who'd confessed to looking into the eye just that morning. All of them showed signs of the amber infection in their irises. All of them muttered about the voices in their heads. Alistair helped Moira draw symbols on the floor in chalk mixed with salt and iron filings. Protective circles, binding sigils, words in languages older than Latin. Whether they would work or not, he didn't know. But doing something felt better than waiting passively for doom. MacLeod and Drummond stood guard, watching the shadows as if they expected them to coalesce into something solid. It's coming, Agnes suddenly announced, her voice dreamy and distant. I can feel it reaching out. It's so matter, hungry. It wants to know everything, to see everything. Why do we hide our true selves? Why do we pretend? Agnes, stay with us, her father pleaded, but her eyes were fully amber now, glowing faintly in the dim light. One by one, the other victims' eyes began to glow as well. It's here, Moira said. The oil lamps flickered, and the temperature dropped until their breath showed in clouds. The cellar door slammed shut of its own accord. And there, materializing in the center of their protective circle, was the eye. It had broken free of its box somehow, floating in midair at the height of a man's face. It rotated slowly, pupil dilating and contracting, seeing everything, knowing everything. Where its gaze fell, Alistair felt his thoughts laid bare. every secret and shame exposed. The victims began to scream, clutching their heads. The eye was pulling at them, trying to complete its consumption. "Now!" Moira cried, beginning a chant in Gaelic. Alistair joined his voice to hers, though he didn't know the words. MacLeod and Drummond followed, and together they pushed back against the eye's influence. But it wasn't enough. The eye's power was too great, too concentrated. It had fed on too many minds. One of the victims, Robert Campbell, collapsed, convulsing. The amber in his eyes flared brilliant, and then it was gone, leaving his eyes blank and empty. His mind had been consumed entirely. "The sacrifice!" Moira gasped. "We need the sacrifice, or we all fall." Alistair stepped forward, but Reverend Drummond moved faster. The minister walked straight into the eye's gaze, arms spread wide. "Take me," he said clearly. "I brought this curse to my village." I looked into the eye, seeking to judge others, and instead found myself wanting. Let my pride be my penance. Take my mind, and release those I've damned. "Father, no." Agnes screamed, but Drummond smiled at her, and in that moment he looked at peace. "I love you, daughter. Forgive me." The eyes, pupil dilated, fixing on the Reverend. Amber light flared, enveloping him. He stood firm, as his mind was stripped away, layer by layer. Alistair watched in horror as Drummond's expression went from serene to blank, his identity consumed to feed the eye's insatiable hunger. But the Reverend's sacrifice bought them time. Moira completed the ritual, her voice rising to a crescendo. The symbols on the floor began to glow with cold blue light. The protective circle tightened, constricting around the eye like a noose. The eye shrieked, not a sound heard with ears, but felt in the mind, a psychic scream of rage and hunger. It thrashed against the bindings, trying to break free, to feed on more minds before it was trapped. "All of you," Moira commanded. "Those who looked, look again. Look at it while the binding holds. Show it your will to resist." Agnes, Sarah, James, Mary, they all stepped forward, joining Alistair in staring into that terrible amber gaze. This time, though, they weren't alone. Together, their minds formed a wall, pushing back against the eye's hunger. It was agony. Alistair felt his sense of self fragmenting, mixing with the others, all of them drowning in an ocean of unwanted knowledge. But he held on, anchored by one thought. This ends tonight. The binding symbols flared brighter. The eye began to crack, fissures appearing in its surface, amber light leaking out like blood. With a final, silent scream, it shattered. The explosion of psychic energy threw them all backward. For a moment, Alistair saw everything, every thought of every person in Inverwick. The accumulated knowledge the eye had stolen over centuries, the vast and terrible hunger that had animated it. Then it was gone, dispersing into nothingness. When they came to their senses, dawn light was filtering through the cellar windows. The protective circle was scorched into the floor, and in its center lay only dust and fragments of amber crystal. Reverend Drummond sat against the wall, breathing but empty. His eyes stared at nothing, his mind completely gone. He would live, but only as a shell, unable to speak or recognize even his own daughter. Agnes wept over him while the others gathered themselves. The amber color had faded from their eyes, and though they still bore the memory of what they'd seen in others' minds, the overwhelming flood had stopped. Their minds were their own again. "It's done," Moira said wearily. "The eye is destroyed. Its hunger ended." "At what cost?" MacLeod asked, looking at Drummond's vacant face. Alistair had no answer. They had saved the village, yes, but the price had been high. Robert Campbell was dead, his mind consumed before Drummond's sacrifice. The Reverend himself was effectively gone, even if his body remained. And Alistair? He could still remember what he'd seen when he looked into the eye. Every secret of everyone he'd encountered, the weight of that knowledge would haunt him forever. As they climbed out of the cellar into the pale morning light, the fog was finally beginning to lift. Inverwick looked different, somehow quieter, humbler. as if the village itself had been chastened by its ordeal. MacLeod put a hand on Alistair's shoulder. "Will you return to Edinburgh?" Alistair thought of Margaret, of Dr. Pierce, of the confrontation he'd been avoiding. Now, having seen into the depths of human weakness and suffering, his own troubles seemed smaller somehow, no less painful, but more manageable. "Yes," he said. "There are things I need to face, truths I need to speak." They walked through the village square together, as the sun broke through the clouds, for the first time in weeks. Behind them, in the kirk cellar, Agnes Drummond held her father's hand and sang him lullabies, caring for the man who had sacrificed everything to save her. The Eye of Inverwick was destroyed, but its scars would remain. Some knowledge, once gained, could never be forgotten. Some prices once paid could never be refunded. And in the darkness, in places where curious men dealt in cursed artifacts, other eyes waited in other boxes, hungry and patient, ready to grant the sight that so many desired and so few could survive. 3 weeks after the eye's destruction, Alistair Morven should have felt relief. Instead, as he sat in MacLeod's study nursing a whiskey that didn't quite drive away the chill, he felt only a growing sense of dread. "Tell me again," he said, though he'd heard the report twice already. MacLeod's hands trembled as he refilled his own glass. Martha Sinclair was the first. "She woke yesterday morning, complaining that she could hear thoughts not her own," she said. Her husband assumed it was merely nerves from all the recent troubles. But by midday, she was screaming. By evening, her eyes had begun to change. "The amber?" "Yes, just like before." Alistair closed his own eyes, trying to process this information through the fog of exhaustion that had plagued him since the ritual. "But we destroyed it. I saw it shatter. We all did." "I know what we saw," MacLeod said sharply. Then, more quietly, "But I also know what I'm seeing now. 3 people in as many days, all exhibiting the same symptoms. Whatever we destroyed, it wasn't the end of this nightmare." A knock at the door interrupted them. Agnes Drummond entered, looking far older than her 20 years. The ordeal had hollowed her out, leaving dark circles under eyes that had seen too much. She spent her days caring for her father, who sat in the Kirk's residence like a breathing statue, alive but absent. "Dr. MacLeod, Dr. Morven," she said. Her voice carried an eerie calmness now, the product of trauma processed into something harder than grief. "I need to speak with you about what's happening." "Agnes, you should be resting," MacLeod began. "I've been dreaming," she interrupted. "Every night since the ritual, I see the eye reforming, piece by piece. And I see something else, something we missed." She moved to the window, staring out at the fog that had returned with a vengeance, thicker than before. "When the eye shattered, we thought we'd destroyed it. But you can't destroy hunger itself, can you? You can only scatter it." Alistair felt ice in his veins. "What are you saying?" "The fragments," Agnes said. "There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Pieces of amber crystal scattered across the cellar floor. What happened to them?" MacLeod's face went pale. We swept them up, disposed of them." "Where?" "I don't." He stopped, memory dawning. Reverend Drummond, before he lost himself, he helped clean the cellar. He gathered the fragments in a cloth. I assumed he burned them or buried them, but you didn't see him do it," Agnes finished. "None of us did. We were all too exhausted, too traumatized. And my father, in those last moments before his mind was taken, was still the man who'd bought the eye in the first place, the man who couldn't bring himself to destroy it." Alistair stood abruptly. "We need to search the Kirk, now. If those fragments still exist, they more than exist," Agnes said quietly. "They're spreading. Each fragment carries a portion of the eye's power. Smaller, weaker, but still hungry, still watching. People are finding them, taking them, not understanding what they are. Pretty amber stones, they think. Trinkets to keep or trade." "How do you know this?" MacLeod demanded. Agnes's eyes met his, and Alistair saw the terrible knowledge still lurking there. She had looked into the eye, had her mind open to see the thoughts of others. Though the connection was broken, the capacity remained. "Because I can still feel them," she whispered. "Not like before, not the overwhelming flood, but there are echoes. When I concentrate, I can sense the fragments, and through them, I can sense the minds they've touched. Martha Sinclair has one. So does Thomas Reed and Elspeth. Morrison. And there are others, people who've picked up fragments but haven't looked too closely yet. But they will. Curiosity always wins in the end." McLeod grabbed his coat. "We need to recover every piece before the entire village falls victim." The search began immediately. They started in the Kirk cellar, where Moira joined them, her ancient face grave as she examined the space where the eye had been destroyed. The protective circle was still visible, burned into the stone, but at its center where the fragments should have fallen, the floor was clean. "Someone gathered them carefully," Moira observed, running her fingers over the stone. "See here. Scrape marks where they were collected into something. A bowl or bag, perhaps. They found it in Reverend Drummond's study, a small leather pouch hidden in a locked drawer of his desk. Inside were perhaps 24 amber fragments, each no larger than a grain of wheat. Even through the leather, Alistair could feel that wrongness, that sense of being observed. "He kept the largest pieces," Moira said, "but there should be many more. He must have distributed them or hidden them before his mind was taken." Agnes closed her eyes, concentrating. When she spoke, her voice had that distant quality that made Alistair's skin crawl. "Martha Sinclair. Her fragment is in her home, in a small wooden box on her dresser. She found it in the Kirk garden while walking 3 days ago. It caught the light, and she thought it pretty. She hasn't looked directly into it yet, but tonight she will. The pull is growing stronger. Take us to her," Alistair said. They hurried through the fog-shrouded streets. It was mid-afternoon, but the fog made it feel like dusk. Shapes moved within the gray murk villagers going about their business. Though fewer than before, many had shuttered themselves inside, afraid of whatever new curse had befallen Inverwick. Martha Sinclair's cottage stood near the village green. Her husband, Donald, opened the door with obvious reluctance, his face haggard with worry. "She's in the bedroom," he said without preamble. "She won't let me near her. Says she can hear my thoughts, that she knows about." He trailed off, shame coloring his features. They found Martha sitting on her bed, the wooden box clutched in her lap. Her eyes were already showing traces of amber, and she rocked back and forth, muttering to herself. "Mrs. Sinclair," McLeod said gently. "We've come to help." Her eyes snapped to him, and Alistair saw recognition and revulsion war in her expression. "Help? You can't help. None of you can. It's in my mind now, showing me things. Terrible things about everyone. About my husband. About myself. Did you know what I did to my sister? What I did to get Donald to marry me?" "We need you to give us the stone," Alistair said, stepping forward carefully. "The amber fragment. It's causing this. No." She clutched the box tighter. "It's showing me the besom, truth. Isn't truth sacred? Shouldn't we all see each other as we really are? The truth it shows is poisoned," Agnes said, moving to stand beside Alistair. "I know, Martha. I've been where you are. The knowledge it gives isn't wisdom. It's a weapon that destroys both the seer and the seen. Give it to us before it takes your mind entirely." For a moment, Martha seemed to waver. Then her grip tightened. "If I'm going mad, why shouldn't everyone else? Why should I suffer alone?" She opened the box. Inside, nestled in cotton wool, was a fragment of amber no larger than a pea. But even that small piece held power. It pulsed with that sickening golden light, and Alistair felt its pull, the whispered promise of forbidden knowledge. Martha lifted it toward her eye, and Donald lunged forward, knocking the box from her hands. The fragment flew through the air, and Alistair caught it instinctively. The moment his skin touched the amber, the world exploded into a cacophony of thoughts. He saw Martha's jealousy, the poison she'd put in her sister's tea to make her sick enough that Donald would turn his affections elsewhere. He saw Donald's betrayal, the money he'd been skimming from his employer. He saw McLeod's daily struggle with guilt, Agnes's buried rage at her father for bringing this curse upon them, Moira's secret that she'd known what the merchant was selling, had known and said nothing because she wanted to see if the village's faith would hold against temptation, and beneath it all, he felt the hunger, smaller than the whole eye had been, but no less insistent. This fragment wanted to feed, to grow, to reunite with its scattered siblings, and reform into something even more powerful than before. Alistair forced his hand open, letting the fragment fall into the pouch Moira held ready. The connection severed, leaving him gasping. 5 seconds, he managed. I only held it for 5 seconds, and I could feel it pulling at my mind. How is anyone supposed to resist? They're not, Moira said grimly, sealing the pouch with cord wound in a complex pattern. That's the point. The eye was broken, but its purpose remains. It wants to see, to know, to feed, and it will use whatever form it can to achieve that end. Martha collapsed, weeping, her husband holding her despite his own trauma. The amber was already fading from her eyes, but Alistair knew the damage was done. She would remember what she'd seen in others' minds, and they would remember that she'd seen it. Trust, once broken by such intimate knowledge, could never be fully repaired. How many more? McLeod asked Agnes. She was silent for a long moment, that distant look on her face. At least 7, maybe more. Some of the fragments are too small to sense clearly, but they're out there, being found, being kept, waiting for someone to look too closely. We'll never find them all in time, Donald said bitterly. This village is doomed. Not doomed, Moira corrected. But tested. We must warn everyone, tell them what to look for. Any amber stone, any golden crystal, they must bring them to the Kirk immediately, without examining them closely. And if they refuse? Alistair asked. People are curious by nature. Forbidden knowledge is the most tempting kind. Moira's smile was grim. Then they'll learn what so many before them have learned. Some knowledge comes at too high a price. They spent the rest of the day going door to door, warning the villagers about the fragments. The reactions varied from fear to skepticism to outright denial. Several people admitted to finding pretty stones in recent days, but claimed to have lost them or thrown them away. Alistair suspected they were lying, hoarding their prizes, unable to resist the lure of the eye's power. By nightfall, they'd recovered 3 more fragments, 1 from Thomas Reed, who'd been carrying it in his pocket for 2 days, and 2 from children who'd found them while playing. The children's eyes hadn't changed yet, but Agnes said they'd begun to hear whispers, promises of secrets about their parents and friends. As they gathered in McLeod's study that evening, exhausted and discouraged, Agnes made an announcement that chilled them all. There's something else, she said. Something I didn't mention before because I wasn't certain, but now I am. What is it? Alistair asked. The fragments aren't just passive objects waiting to be found. They're moving. I can feel it. They're being drawn together, pulled by the same hunger that animated the original eye. They want to reunite, to reform. That's impossible, McLeod protested. They're just crystal, just matter. No, Moira said quietly. The girl is right. What we destroyed wasn't a physical object, but a vessel, the entity that inhabited it. The hunger itself was scattered, but not eliminated. It exists in each fragment, and it's trying to reconstitute itself. If enough pieces come together, we'll face the eye again. Alistair finished, potentially stronger than before, having fed on more minds. The implications were staggering. They couldn't simply collect the fragments and destroy them. The entity might survive even that, dispersing into smaller and smaller pieces, an eternal plague of cursed knowledge. There must be a way to banish it entirely, McLeod said. Some ritual, some method. There is, Moira interrupted, but you won't like it. She explained that the entity feeding on the fragments was ancient, predating human civilization. It was drawn to consciousness, to the complexity of human thought and emotion. It couldn't be destroyed because it was, in essence, a fundamental force, the hunger for knowledge taken to its ultimate, corrupted extreme. But it could be trapped, contained in a vessel so perfect, so complete, that it could never escape. What kind of vessel? Alistair asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. A human mind, Moira said, willing, conscious, and strong enough to contain the entity's hunger without being consumed. The person would live, but they would spend every moment of every day fighting to keep the entity imprisoned within their thoughts. They would never know peace, never know rest. And when they died, the entity would be released, unless another was ready to take their place. You're describing a life sentence of mental torture, MacLeod said, horrified. I'm describing the only way to save this village and prevent the eye from spreading beyond it, Moira replied. One person's sacrifice to spare thousands, perhaps millions, if the fragments were to scatter across Scotland and beyond. No, Agnes said. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood by the window, her reflection ghostly in the fog-darkened glass. No one should have to bear that burden. There must be another way. But even as she spoke, Alistair could see the resignation in her eyes. She'd already considered this option. Perhaps had been considering it since the eye's destruction. Before anyone could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shouting, screaming, the sound of breaking glass. They rushed to the window and saw a horrifying sight. In the village square, a crowd had gathered. At its center stood Elspeth Morrison, the elderly widow who lived alone at the edge of the village. Her eyes blazed with amber light, and in her withered hands she held not one fragment but several, at least 5 or 6 pieces of varying sizes, clutched together. And she was laughing. "Look at you all," she cried. "So pious, so proper. But I can see your true faces now. I know what you've done, what you've thought, what you've desired." She began naming names, revealing secrets with gleeful malice. Affairs, thefts, petty cruelties, deep shames. Nothing was sacred to the fragment's revelations. The crowd recoiled, but they couldn't look away. Horror and fascination warred on every face. "She's gone completely mad," MacLeod breathed. "The fragments, she must have been collecting them for days." Alistair understood with sickening clarity what had happened. Elspeth, lonely and bitter after years of being ignored by the village, had found the fragments and recognized them for what they were. She deliberately sought them out, hoarding them, letting their power grow within her. Now she was using that power as a weapon. "Mrs. Morrison," Alistair called, stepping into the square. "You must give us those stones. They're destroying your mind." Her amber gaze fixed on him, and he felt her consciousness pressing against his own. "Oh, I know you, Dr. Morven, from Edinburgh. I know about your faithless wife, your cowardice. Should I tell everyone? Should I share your shame as you've come to judge mine?" "Tell them whatever you like," Alistair said, forcing his voice steady. "My secrets are my own burden to bear. But what you're doing now, this isn't justice. This is cruelty born of pain." "Pain?" She laughed again, the sound brittle and broken. "I've lived with pain for 30 years. Widowed, childless, forgotten. The village came to me only when they needed someone to blame for their troubles. The strange old woman, the witch, the curse. Well, now I have power. Now I have sight. And I'll make them all see what they truly are." More fragments appeared in the crowd, people reaching into pockets, pulling out small amber stones they'd been hiding. The eye was drawing them together, using human greed and curiosity as its vehicle. Agnes moved to Alistair's side. "It's happening," she whispered. "The Reformation. Can't you feel it? The fragments are calling to each other." He could. A vibration in the air, a sense of power building like electricity before a storm. If the fragments came together, if they fused back into a complete eye. "We have to stop this now," he said. Moira appeared, ancient and terrible in her fury. She began to chant in Gaelic, the same binding ritual they'd used before. But her voice was weaker now, and there were too many fragments, too much power dispersed among too many people. Elspeth laughed at the old woman's efforts. "Your magic is useless, crone. The eye has evolved. It's no longer bound by your primitive symbols. It's part of us now, woven into our thoughts. You can't banish what we carry within our own minds. And she was right. The fragments in people's pockets began to glow, responding to the ones in Elspeth's hands. Amber light flickered throughout the crowd, and one by one, eyes began to change color. The entity was spreading, infecting everyone who'd taken a fragment, linking them together into a network of invaded consciousness. Alistair felt his own fragment, the one in the sealed pouch at MacLeod's house, begin to pulse in sympathy. Even contained, it was responding to the call. It's going to win, MacLeod said, despair thick in his voice. We can't fight this. The village is lost. But Agnes stepped forward, her expression resolved. Not lost. Not yet. She walked directly toward Elspeth, ignoring the amber-eyed villagers who reached for her, their movements becoming synchronized, puppet-like. The entity was already beginning to control them, using their bodies as extensions of its will. Agnes, get back, Alistair shouted. But she kept walking, and when she reached Elspeth, she did something unexpected. She took the old woman's hands, fragments and all, and held them. I see you, Agnes said softly. Not your secrets or your sins. I see your pain, your loneliness, your fear of being forgotten. The eye promised you power, but it's not giving you sight. It's giving you a poisoned mirror that reflects only the worst of humanity. Elspeth's laughter faltered. You. End quote. End quote. You understand? I understand better than anyone. I've been where you are. I've had my mind opened to see the darkness in others. It's seductive, isn't it? To feel superior, to hold such knowledge? But it's hollow, Elspeth. The power is eating you from the inside out. Tears streamed down the old woman's withered cheeks. I just wanted to matter, to be seen. I see you, Agnes repeated, and I forgive you. Will you let me help? For a moment, the amber in Elspeth's eyes flickered, her humanity fighting against the entity's control. Then the fragments in her hands flared brilliant, and she screamed. The entity was fighting back, refusing to release its host. But Agnes held on, and Alistair saw what she was doing. She was using her own damaged psyche, her mind that had been opened by the original eye as a conduit. She was drawing the entity out of Elspeth and into herself. No! Alistair rushed forward. Agnes, you'll be consumed. Better one than many, she said, her voice already strained. The amber was spreading from Elspeth's eyes to hers, the entity flowing from one host to another. Someone has to contain it. Someone has to be the vessel. Let it be someone who's already been broken by its power. There must be another way. There isn't. Her eyes were fully amber now, glowing brighter than any of the others. Tell my father I'm sorry. Tell him I tried to make it right. The fragments in Elspeth's hands crumbled to dust, their power fully transferred. The old woman collapsed, and Alistair caught her as Agnes stood alone in the square, light blazing from her eyes like twin suns. All around them, the villagers fell to their knees, clutching their heads. The fragments in their possession turned to dust as well, their power drawn into Agnes. She was becoming the vessel, the prison, containing the scattered entity within herself. Agnes, Moira said, approaching carefully. Can you hear me, child? I can hear everything, Agnes replied, and her voice held an eerie harmony, as if multiple beings spoke through her throat. Every thought in every mind in Inverwick, the entity's hunger, my own consciousness, they're all tangled together now. Can you contain it? A long pause. When Agnes spoke again, her voice was her own, though strained with effort. Yes, for now. But Moira, you were right. This is a battle I'll fight every moment until I die. And even then, it must be passed to another, or the entity will be freed. I've doomed myself to eternal vigilance. You've saved the village, Alistair said, his voice breaking. You've saved us all. Agnes looked at him, and despite the amber glow, he could see the scared young woman beneath. Have I? Or have I merely delayed the inevitable? How long can one person hold back such hunger? Before anyone could answer, she turned and walked away into the fog. Her father's cottage called to her, and Alistair understood she was going to him to spend whatever time remained in the company of the man who'd started all this. The man who couldn't know what his daughter had sacrificed to correct his mistake. The crowd dispersed slowly, people stumbling home in shock, trying to process what they'd witnessed. The fragments were gone, turned to dust, but the memories remained. Everyone knew everyone else's secrets now. The village would never be the same. Alistair, MacLeod, and Moira stood in the empty square as dawn began to break. "What happens now?" MacLeod asked. "Now," Moira said quietly, "we watch. We protect Agnes as long as she can maintain the prison, and we pray that her will is strong enough to hold, because if it fails, she didn't need to finish." They all understood. If Agnes's mind broke under the strain, the entity would be released more powerful than ever, having consumed her completely. The Eye of Inverwick had been destroyed and reborn, scattered and reconstituted. Now it lived in Agnes Drummond, a girl who'd already sacrificed so much, and in the darkness of her thoughts it waited, hungry and patient, for the moment when her guard would slip. 6 months had passed since Agnes Drummond became the vessel, and Inverwick had learned to live with its new normal. The village existed under a pall of knowing everyone, aware of everyone else's darkest secrets, trust replaced by uncomfortable truth. Agnes remained in her father's cottage, caring for the man who sat vacant-eyed in his chair, while fighting her own hourly battle against the entity that lived within her mind. She rarely emerged, and when she did, people averted their eyes, not from shame, but from fear of what she might see, what the entity might whisper through her lips. Alistair had returned to Edinburgh for a time, confronting Margaret about her affair. The conversation had been painful but necessary. Aided by the perspective he'd gained in Inverwick, they'd separated amicably, both acknowledging that their marriage had been dying long before her betrayal, but he couldn't stay away from the village. Something pulled him back, concern for Agnes, certainly, but also a nagging sense that the story wasn't finished. The entity had been contained, not destroyed. And Alistair had learned enough to know that such arrangements rarely held forever. Now, as winter gripped Scotland and snow covered the village like a burial shroud, he stood once again in MacLeod's study, listening to news that confirmed his worst fears. "She's failing," MacLeod said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The physician had aged visibly in the past months, the weight of Inverwick's curse bowing his shoulders. "Agnes's strength is ebbing. I see it in her eyes, not just the amber, but the strain. The entity is wearing her down, patient as death itself." "How long does she have?" Alistair asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Weeks, maybe days. And when she falls?" MacLeod didn't finish. He didn't need to. Moira McTavish sat by the fire, her ancient face carved with shadows. "The entity has been feeding on her will, slowly consuming her resistance. It's learning from her, adapting. When it breaks free, it will be more powerful than we can imagine. Then, we find another vessel," Alistair said. "Someone willing to take Agnes's place, give her rest." "No one else can hold it," Moira interrupted. Agnes was uniquely suited. Her mind had already been opened by the original Eye, creating a space the entity could fill. Anyone else would be overwhelmed instantly, consumed in moments. Agnes has lasted this long only because she'd already been broken and reformed by the experience. "So we're simply going to let her die?" Alistair's voice rose with frustration. "Let the entity win? There may be another way," Moira said slowly. "But it's dangerous. Perhaps more dangerous than anything we've attempted yet." She stood and retrieved an ancient book from MacLeod's shelf, a grimoire she'd brought to the village months ago, written in languages that predated Latin. Its pages were yellow with age. The ink faded, but still legible to those who knew how to look. "The entity within Agnes is a hunger for knowledge," Moira explained, opening the book to a marked page. "It exists to see, to know, to consume understanding. But what if we could satisfy that hunger? Give it everything it desires in one moment, a feast so overwhelming that it would burst, for lack of a better word. Alistair leaned over the book, studying the diagrams and text. His medical training rebelled against the mystical nature of it all, but months in Inverwick had taught him that reality was more complex than Edinburgh's lectures suggested. "You're proposing we flood it with knowledge?" he asked. "How?" "A ritual of revelation," Moira said. "We would gather everyone in Inverwick who's been touched by the eye, everyone who looked into it or its fragments. Together, we would open our minds completely, holding nothing back, and force the entity to consume everything at once, every memory, every thought, every secret and dream and fear. The totality of human experience, from dozens of souls, all flooding into the entity simultaneously. That would destroy Agnes," MacLeod protested. "Her mind couldn't survive being the channel for such an influx." "No," Moira agreed quietly. "It wouldn't. Agnes would be consumed in the process. But so would the entity, gorged beyond its capacity, unable to process or contain such a flood. It would effectively drown. Destroyed not by deprivation, but by overwhelming abundance." Silence fell over the room. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the village in white. "I won't ask her to die," Alistair said finally. "There must be another option." "Then find it," Moira challenged. "You're the man of science. You're the one who doesn't believe in supernatural solutions. Tell me, what rational explanation do you have for what we've witnessed? What medical treatment can cure a mind infected by an entity of pure hunger?" Alistair had no answer. In his most honest moments, he had to admit that his scientific worldview had been shattered by Inverwick. Some phenomena existed beyond materialism, beyond the explanations his medical texts provided. A knock at the door interrupted them. When MacLeod answered, they found Agnes herself standing on the threshold, snow-dusting her dark hair. Her eyes blazed with amber light even in the daylight, and her face was gaunt, stretched thin over bones that seemed more prominent each day. "I heard you," she said, and her voice carried that dual quality, her own consciousness and the entity speaking together. "Even from across the village, I heard your thoughts. The entity hears everything now. It's growing stronger as I grow weaker." "Agnes, you shouldn't have come out," MacLeod said, ushering her inside. The cold doesn't matter," she interrupted. "Nothing matters except ending this. And Moira is right. The ritual of revelation is the only way." "We haven't agreed to anything," Alistair protested. Agnes looked at him, and for a moment, the amber in her eyes cleared enough that he could see the young woman beneath. "Alistair, I'm dying anyway. Every day, I lose a little more of myself. The entity consumes me piece by piece, memory by memory. Yesterday, I couldn't remember my mother's face. This morning, I forgot my own name for an hour. How long before there's nothing left of Agnes Drummond except the thing wearing her skin? Then let us find another way. There is no other way." The outburst was so uncharacteristic that everyone startled. Agnes took a shuddering breath. "Forgive me, but you must understand I've explored every option from within. The entity has given me access to knowledge beyond human comprehension. I've seen the patterns, the possibilities. Every path that doesn't end with the ritual leads to the entity's eventual escape, and when it escapes through me, it will have learned everything I know about human will, human resistance. It will be unstoppable." "She's right," Moira said. "The entity is using Agnes not just as a prison, but as a school. It's studying humanity through her, learning our weaknesses. The longer it remains contained, the more dangerous its eventual release becomes." MacLeod poured whiskey for everyone with trembling hands. "Then we perform the ritual, but not without giving Agnes a fighting chance. Is there any way to protect her during the process? Any shield or ward that might preserve her consciousness?" Moira considered this. "Perhaps, if we could anchor her to something fundamental, a memory or emotion strong enough to serve as a lifeline. Something the entity cannot consume because it's been tied to her very essence. Love, Agnes said softly. My father. Even mindless as he is, I love him. That's what's kept me fighting this long. The need to care for him, to sit with him in the evenings and pretend he knows me. Could that work? It might, Moira admitted. But it would require your father's presence at the ritual. He would serve as your anchor, the fixed point around which your consciousness could orbit. The entity can consume knowledge and memory, but pure emotion love, divorced from reason, that's something it cannot digest. Then we'll do it, Agnes said with finality. Gather everyone who's been touched by the eye. Prepare your ritual. We end this tomorrow night, while I still have enough of myself left to choose my own death. The next day was spent in frantic preparation. Moira drew symbols throughout the kirk, the same building where the eye had first been destroyed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone they would end where they began. The church that had been meant to protect the village now serving as the site of its most desperate gambit. Alistair helped MacLeod contact everyone who'd been infected by the eye or its fragments. Some came willingly, understanding the necessity. Others had to be convinced, their fear of reliving those awful moments of invasive sight, warring with their recognition that Agnes's sacrifice demanded their participation. By nightfall, 23 people had gathered in the kirk. They included everyone who'd looked into the original eye, those who'd been infected by fragments, even young children who'd touched the amber stones before they were recovered. Reverend Drummond was brought from his cottage, seated in a chair near the altar, his empty eyes staring at nothing. Agnes stood at the center of the ritual circle, surrounded by candles and symbols drawn in salt and ash. She'd washed and dressed in clean clothes, looking almost like the young woman she'd been before the curse. But her eyes never stopped glowing, and when she moved, it was with a jerky, uncertain quality, as if two beings fought for control of her body. Before we begin, she said, her voice echoing in the stone chamber, I want to thank you all. You've all suffered because of the eye, because of my father's pride and my own foolishness in trying to destroy it alone. What we attempt tonight may save Inverwick, or it may doom us all. But at least we'll face the end together, in truth. Alistair stepped forward. Agnes, you don't have to do this. Even now, we could— No more delays, Dr. Morven, she interrupted gently. The entity can hear every word, can feel your doubt feeding its hope. We must act while I can still choose to act. Moira began the chant, her ancient voice rising and falling in patterns that seemed to resonate in the stones themselves. The others joined in, repeating the phrases she'd taught them, even though most didn't understand the words' meanings. The air grew thick, heavy with power. The candles flickered despite the absence of any breeze, and Agnes's eyes blazed brighter, the amber light spilling out like liquid gold. Now, Moira commanded, open your minds. Hold nothing back. Show the entity everything, every memory, every thought, every fragment of consciousness you possess. Flood it with your humanity. Alistair let his mental defenses drop, a sensation like standing naked in a winter storm. He felt the presence of others pressing against his mind. MacLeod's guilt, Moira's ancient weariness, Martha Sinclair's shame, Elspeth Morrison's loneliness. Every person in the circle opened themselves completely, their consciousness flowing toward Agnes at the center, and through Agnes, into the entity. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Agnes screamed, her body convulsing as the flood of human experience poured into her. The entity had been hungry, yes, but this was a feast beyond its capacity to consume. Imagine trying to drink an ocean through a straw. That was what the entity faced, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of consciousness being forced upon it. Alistair felt himself being pulled into the maelstrom, his sense of self fragmenting as his mind merged with the collective. He saw through 23 pairs of eyes simultaneously, felt 23 lifetimes of joy and suffering, knew secrets that had never been his to know, and at the center of it all, Agnes fought to maintain her identity against an impossible tide. The entity thrashed within her, trying to escape, but Moira's binding symbols held. It was trapped, forced to consume, to know, to see everything at once, every petty cruelty and moment of grace, every lie and act of kindness. The full spectrum of human experience, beautiful and terrible and mundane, all crashing into consciousness, designed only to hunger, never to be satisfied. Something fundamental began to crack. Alistair felt it, the entity's coherence breaking down under the strain. It had existed as pure hunger for millennia, a simple and terrible thing, but now it was being forced to become complex, to hold contradictions, to contain the messy reality of human existence, and it couldn't. Agnes's scream rose to a pitch beyond sound, beyond pain. The amber light exploded outward from her eyes, filling the kirk with golden radiance. For a moment, Alistair saw everything. He saw the entity's origin, not a demon or supernatural being, but a thought-given form in humanity's infancy. The first conscious desire to know another's mind, taken to its ultimate, corrupted extreme. It had fed on that desire for thousands of years, growing stronger with each victim, but always remaining fundamentally simple. A hunger, nothing more. Now, gorged on the complexity of 23 human souls, it was being forced to evolve or die, and it was dying. The light pulsed once, twice, then began to fragment. Golden shards broke away from Agnes like leaves in a storm, dissolving into nothing before they touched the ground. The entity was coming apart, unable to maintain coherence under the weight of too much knowledge. Too much consciousness, too much humanity. Agnes collapsed, and Alistair broke from the circle to catch her. Her eyes had cleared no longer amber, but her own warm brown, though dazed and distant. Blood trickled from her nose and ears, her body trembling with the aftershocks of what she'd endured. "Did it work?" she whispered. "Is it gone?" Alistair looked around the kirk. The golden light had vanished completely. The oppressive weight of the entity's presence, the constant sense of being watched, had lifted. The air felt clean for the first time in months. "I think so," he said. "I think it's truly destroyed." But even as he spoke, he felt something wrong. Agnes's eyes might have cleared, but her expression held a distance that hadn't been there before. When she looked at him, he saw recognition, but also something else, a depth of knowledge that made him uncomfortable. "Agnes?" he asked carefully. She smiled, and it was her smile, but there was an edge to it. "I'm here, Alistair, but I'm not alone. Not entirely." Horror bloomed in his chest. "The entity is destroyed," she assured him quickly. "Truly destroyed. But destroying it didn't erase what it left behind. All those thoughts, all that knowledge, it forced into my mind during our time together, that remains. I still see into others, though not as overwhelmingly as before. I still know secrets I was never meant to know." Moira approached, her expression grave. The vessel contained the entity, but the vessel itself was changed by the experience. Agnes has become something new, neither fully human nor entity, but a hybrid, a mind expanded beyond normal limits. "Will I go mad?" Agnes asked, and there was fear in her voice now, the fear of a young woman who'd sacrificed everything and still might lose herself. "I don't know," Moira admitted. "You've traveled further into consciousness than any human should. The maps don't extend to where you've been." Agnes stood on shaky legs, and Alistair noticed that the others in the circle were similarly affected. They all bore expressions of stunned exhaustion, as if they'd run for miles. The ritual had taken its toll on everyone. But it was Reverend Drummond who drew gasps from the crowd. The minister sat in his chair as he had for months, unmoving and unresponsive. But now tears streamed down his face. His empty eyes had gained focus, fixed on his daughter with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. "Agnes," he croaked, the first word he'd spoken since the original eye destroyed his mind. "My child, what have you done?" Agnes flew to him, dropping to her knees beside his chair. "Father? Father, are you back?" He struggled with words, his atrophied mind trying to reconnect with language. "I'm not what I was, but I'm here. The ritual, when everyone's minds opened, when the flood came through you, some of it reached me. Enough to wake me, to pull me back from the void. He gripped her hands with surprising strength. I'm so sorry. For all of it. For buying the eye. For subjecting you to this curse. For being too weak to stop it myself. You saved me, and you saved the village, and the cost was too high. You're back, Agnes said, weeping. That's all that matters. You're back. But even in this, the moment of reunion, Alistair saw the shadow in Agnes's eyes. The knowledge she carried, the burden of seeing too much, wouldn't simply disappear. The entity was gone, but its legacy remained, written into her consciousness. The villagers departed slowly, helping each other through the snow-covered streets. They'd given everything in the ritual, and they'd won. But victory felt hollow, tasted like ash. They'd looked into the abyss of shared consciousness, had their minds violated in ways that couldn't be undone. Inverwick would survive, but it would never heal. Not completely. Alistair remained behind with MacLeod and Moira as Agnes helped her father to his feet. The minister was weak, his muscles wasted from months of immobility, but his mind seemed to be returning more with each passing moment. It wasn't the complete restoration they might have hoped for, but it was something. It was mercy. What happens now? MacLeod asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. Now we learn to live with what we know, Moira said. The eye is gone, but the village has been changed forever. Everyone here knows everyone else's darkest secrets. There's no privacy, no comfortable illusions left. They'll either build a new community based on that terrible honesty, or they'll tear themselves apart. And Agnes? Alistair looked at the young woman supporting her father, her face showing the strain of both the ritual and the knowledge she couldn't escape. Agnes will have to find her own way, Moira replied. She's unique now, a mind open to dimensions the rest of us can only glimpse. She may go mad. She may transcend humanity entirely. Or she may simply learn to live with her expanded consciousness, using it to help others as best she can. Someone should stay with her, Alistair said. Watch over her, in case she becomes the very thing we just destroyed? Moira finished. Yes, someone should. I'm too old for such vigilance, and MacLeod has his practice to maintain. That leaves you, Dr. Morven. Will you be her guardian? Alistair thought of Edinburgh, of his separated wife and his medical career waiting for him. He thought of the comfortable certainty of his old life, where the world made sense and mysteries had rational explanations. Then he looked at Agnes and saw the weight she carried, the terrible burden of too much knowledge and not enough support. She'd saved them all. The least he could do was ensure she didn't face the aftermath alone. I'll stay, he said, for as long as she needs me. The weeks that followed were among the strangest of Alistair's life. He took up residence in the room above MacLeod's surgery, spending his days tending to villagers still traumatized by the ritual and his evenings with Agnes and her father. Reverend Drummond's recovery was slow but steady. His mind returned in fragments, memories and skills, reasserting themselves in no particular order. He might forget his daughter's name, but remember obscure passages from Scripture. He could write, but sometimes forgot how to speak. It was as if his consciousness had been shattered and was now being reassembled piece by piece, not quite fitting together the way it had before. Agnes, meanwhile, struggled with her expanded awareness. She described it to Alistair one evening as they sat in the kirk, the place that had become both prison and sanctuary. It's like having 1,000 voices in my head all the time, she said, staring at the candles she'd lit on the altar. Not the entity anymore. That hunger is gone. But echoes, residues of all the minds that poured through me during the ritual. I'll think a thought, and then I'll know that it's not my thought, but something I absorbed from Martha Sinclair or Thomas Reed. I'm becoming a patchwork person, sewn together from scraps of other people's consciousness. That sounds terrifying, Alistair admitted. It is. And it isn't. She turned to look at him and her, eyes still brown. Still hers held depths that made him dizzy. I understand people now in ways I never could before. When someone speaks to me, I don't just hear their words. I feel their meaning, their intent, the emotions behind their language. I can't read thoughts like the eye could, but I can read hearts. Every interaction is layered with meaning, invisible to normal perception. Is it a gift or a curse? She laughed, and the sound was both bitter and bright. Both. Always both. I can help people in ways I never could before. Counsel them, guide them, see the roots of their suffering. But I can never truly connect with them because I see too much. There's no mystery left in human interaction. No surprise, no discovery. Just infinite transparency, and it's exhausting. You're not obligated to use this ability, Alistair said. You could leave Inverwick, start fresh somewhere that doesn't know what you've become. Run away, you mean? She shook her head. I thought about. That's it. But where would I go? This expanded consciousness doesn't have an off switch. I'd still see too much, know too much, no matter where I fled. At least here, people understand what I sacrificed. They may fear me, but they also respect the cost I paid. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the village, sleeping under snow. Besides, Inverwick needs someone like me now. The ritual broke something in this community, the comfortable lies that held it together. Everyone knows everyone else's secrets, and they don't know how to live with that knowledge. I can help them, not because I'm wiser or better, but because I understand intimately what it means to carry knowledge you wish you could forget. Over the following months, Agnes began to fulfill that role. Villagers would come to her, seeking counsel or simply someone who could understand their struggles without judgment. She became a confessor, a mediator, a bridge between people whose trust had been shattered by enforced honesty. Alistair watched her work with admiration and growing concern. She was helping people, yes, but at what cost to herself? Each conversation drained her visibly, adding new layers to the burden she already carried. He worried that she was sacrificing herself again, just more slowly than before. One evening in early spring, as the snow finally began to melt and the first hints of green appeared on the hills, Alistair found Agnes sitting in the kirkyard among the graves. I come here when it gets too loud, she said as he approached. The dead don't have thoughts to perceive. They're peaceful. He sat beside her on the cold stone bench. You're wearing yourself out. I know, Agnes. I know, Alistair. She turned to face him fully. You think I'm heading towards some kind of collapse? That I'm giving too much, taking too little care of myself, and you're probably right. But what else should I do? Ignore the people who need help? Lock myself away and let my abilities atrophy? I think you should live, he said simply. Not just exist as a tool for others, but actually live. Have experiences that aren't about service or sacrifice. Find moments of joy. Joy, she repeated, as if the word were foreign. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Do you know what brought me joy this morning? Mrs. Campbell, the woman who poisoned her sister, she brought me flowers. Garden flowers that she grew herself. Not out of obligation or fear, but because she wanted to. Because 6 months ago, I helped her and her sister reconcile, despite everything. They're friends again, or as close as they can be. That's joy, Alistair. Seeing people heal. But what about your joy? Your healing? I don't think I get to heal, she said quietly. Not completely. I've been too changed. The person I was before the eye, that naive minister's daughter, she's gone. This is what remains, someone who sees too much and tries to help anyway. It's not the life I would have chosen, but it's the life I have. Before Alistair could respond, a commotion erupted in the village below. Shouts, running feet, the sound of terror that had become all too familiar during the curse's height. They ran toward the noise and found a crowd gathered in the square. At its center stood a young man Alistair didn't recognize a stranger, by his clothes and accent. A traveling merchant, perhaps, like the one who'd brought the eye to Inverwick so many months ago. And in his hands, he held a small wooden box. No, Agnes breathed, and Alistair felt his blood run cold. The merchant saw them approaching and smiled, showing too many teeth. Ah, you must be the ones I've heard about. The village that destroyed the Eye of Seeing. Quite a feat. Quite a feat indeed. Leave. Agnes commanded, and her voice held an authority that made the crowd step back. Take whatever you're selling and leave this place. We want no part of cursed artifacts. Cursed? The merchant laughed. My dear lady, you misunderstand. I'm not here to sell anything. I'm here because I heard rumors of what you accomplished, destroying an entity of pure hunger. I came to see if the rumors were true. He opened the box. Inside, Alistair expected to see another eye, amber and terrible. Instead, he saw what looked like a withered heart, preserved in the same way the eye had been, floating in some clear solution. This, the merchant said, is the heart of desire, a companion piece to the eye of seeing, if you will. Where the eye showed you the thoughts of others, the heart shows you their deepest wants, their dreams, their longings, what they would do if they thought no one was watching. Get that away from here, MacLeod demanded, having arrived with others, drawn by the commotion. Oh, I shall. I have no interest in leaving it in Inverwick. No, you've already had your turn with such things. But I thought you should know the eye and the heart are but two of a set. There are 5 in total, scattered across the world. The eye of seeing, the heart of desire, the hand of taking, the tongue of speaking, and the crown of being. He closed the box with a snap. Each one offers power over an aspect of human consciousness. Each one hungers in its own way. You destroyed the eye, yes. Congratulations. But the others remain, and those who seek power will always find them. The question is, what will you do about it? Why are you telling us this? Alistair demanded. The merchant's smile widened. Because you're interesting. A village that defeated one of the 5, that transformed a girl into something new and strange. You're an anomaly, and anomalies have value. I wanted to see you for myself, to decide if you're a threat or an opportunity. And your decision? Agnes asked, her voice dangerous, still forming. But I suspect we'll meet again, Agnes Drummond. You and I have much in common. Both of us changed by forces beyond human reckoning. Both of us carrying knowledge, others' fear. Perhaps one day you'll seek me out. Perhaps one day you'll want to know more about what you've become. With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the morning mist that rose from the melting snow. The crowd stood frozen, uncertain whether they'd witnessed a threat or merely a curiosity. Agnes swayed, and Alistair caught her arm. Are you all right? No, she said. He was telling the truth. I could feel it. There are others' artifacts like the eye, entities like the one I destroyed. And if they exist, if they're out there being bought and sold, then what happened to Inverwick could happen anywhere, to any village, any city. That's not your responsibility, Alistair insisted. You've done enough, more than enough. But he could see the resolve forming in her eyes, the terrible understanding of what her transformation meant. She wasn't just a girl who'd survived a curse. She was a weapon against such curses, uniquely equipped to face the entities that preyed on human consciousness. I can't let it happen again, she said quietly. Not when I might be able to stop it. The eye destroyed lives, Alistair. It broke families, drove people mad, consumed my father's mind. If I can prevent that from happening elsewhere, you'll burn yourself out, he said desperately. You'll become another kind of monster. Hunting monsters. Perhaps. She looked at him with eyes that held infinite sadness and infinite determination. But isn't that better than doing nothing? I've been given this burden, this terrible gift of expanded consciousness. I can let it destroy me slowly through inaction, or I can use it to protect others from the fate I suffered. Those seem to be my only options. There's a third option, Moira said, approaching from the crowd. The old woman looked ancient in the morning light, as if the confrontation with the merchant had aged her decades. You could seek out others, like yourself. The merchant said you're an anomaly, but he implied you're not unique. There may be others who've been touched by these artifacts and survived. Together, you might find a way to not just resist, but to heal. Agnes considered this. A community of the transformed. People who understand what it means to carry impossible knowledge. It's a dream, Moira admitted. But perhaps a better one than martyrdom. Alistair felt hope kindle in his chest. I could help. My medical training, my connections in Edinburgh, we could search together. Build a network of those who've encountered these entities and lived. A guard against the darkness, Agnes said slowly. Not just destroying the artifacts when we find them, but protecting potential victims, healing survivors. It's ambitious, probably impossible. Most worthwhile things are, Alistair replied. Agnes looked around at the villagers, people who'd suffered alongside her, who'd sacrificed their mental privacy to destroy the entity, who'd learned to live with the terrible honesty that resulted. Inverwick would never be the same, but it had survived. That had to count for something. All right, she said finally. We'll try. Not today. I need to finish healing here first. Make sure Inverwick is truly stable. But soon, we'll search for others like me, and we'll warn people about these cursed artifacts. We'll be guardians, Moira supplied. Guardians of consciousness. Protectors against those who would exploit humanity's deepest vulnerabilities. It sounded grandiose, almost absurd. But as Alistair looked at Agnes, this young woman who'd sacrificed everything and emerged transformed, he thought perhaps grandiose was what the situation demanded. The Eye had been ancient, the hunger timeless. Fighting such forces required commitment that transcended ordinary human concerns. Where do we start? He asked. Agnes smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. With research, we need to understand what we're facing, the history of these artifacts, their nature, their weaknesses. Then we find others who've been touched by them, build our network, and when we're ready, we start hunting. Hunting? For the artifacts themselves, the Eye found its way to Inverwick through a merchant who knew what he was selling. There's a market for these things, a trade in cursed objects. We find that market, we disrupt it, we save lives. It won't be safe. It probably won't be successful. But it's better than waiting for the next village to fall victim. Over the following weeks, they began to plan. Alistair wrote letters to colleagues in Edinburgh and London, carefully inquiring about unusual cases, patients with inexplicable knowledge, people driven mad by objects they'd acquired, any hint of the supernatural that might point to another artifact. Agnes continued her work in Inverwick, but also started documenting everything she'd learned from her time as the vessel. Her expanded consciousness allowed her to recall details normal memory would forget, and she filled journal after journal with observations about the entity's nature, its weaknesses, the ritual that had destroyed it. Reverend Drummond, his mind slowly reassembling, assisted as he could. His theological knowledge proved valuable. Many of the artifacts seemed to have religious or mystical origins, and understanding their cultural context helped predict how they might function. Moira served as their link to the old ways, the pre-Christian knowledge that rational Edinburgh medicine dismissed but which had proven essential in fighting the Eye. Between her lore and Alistair's science, they began to build a framework for understanding what they faced. Spring turned to summer, and Inverwick slowly learned to live with its new reality. The village had become a place of uncomfortable honesty, where secrets were impossible and pretense pointless. Surprisingly, this led to a kind of peace. Without the ability to hide, people were forced to forgive, to accept each other's flaws, to build community on truth rather than comfortable lies. Agnes facilitated this transformation, using her expanded consciousness to help people process their newfound knowledge of each other. She became the village's emotional center, the person everyone turned to when truth became too heavy to bear alone. But Alistair saw the toll it took. She grew thinner, more distant, as if her consciousness was slowly untethering from her physical form. He worried that despite their plans for the future, she might not survive long enough to see them realized. Then, in late summer, they received their first lead. A letter arrived from a colleague of Alistair's in Glasgow, Dr. James Crawford. He wrote of a patient, a young man who claimed to have acquired a strange wooden hand from a curio shop. After touching it, the man said he could take anything he desired simply by reaching for it. Money appeared in his pockets. Food materialized in his hands. The objects were real, solid, but their owners never seemed to notice they were missing. The hand of taking. It's happening again, Agnes said when Alistair showed her the letter. Someone has found another artifact, and they don't understand what they're playing with. Crawford says the man is becoming obsessed with acquisition. He's accumulating wealth and possessions at an alarming rate, but he's also becoming paranoid, convinced everyone wants to steal what he's taken. The entity is consuming him through greed rather than hunger for knowledge. Then we have to go to Glasgow, Agnes said, before he's lost completely, and before the hand spreads its influence to others. Are you ready? Alistair asked. This will be your first confrontation since destroying the eye, and the hand's entity may be different, may require different approaches. Agnes looked at her father, who sat reading in the cottage's main room, his mind still fragmented but functional. She looked at the village beyond, at Inverwick, sleeping peacefully under the summer sun, healed as much as it ever would be. I'm ready, she said, or I never will be. Either way, we can't wait. They departed 3 days later, Alistair and Agnes traveling together while MacLeod and Moira remained in Inverwick to watch over the village and continue their research. Reverend Drummond blessed them before they left, his words occasionally jumbled, but his meaning clear. Go with God, and may you save others from the darkness that nearly consumed us. As their coach rattled away from Inverwick, Agnes looked back at the village one last time. Do you think we'll succeed? She asked Alistair. I don't know, he admitted, but I think we have to try. The alternative, letting these artifacts spread unchecked, watching more communities fall to the same curses, that's unacceptable. Even if trying destroys us. Even then. Agnes nodded, and in her eyes, Alistair saw both fear and determination. She'd been broken by the eye, transformed into something neither fully human nor entity, but she'd survived, and she'd learned. Now she would use that terrible knowledge to protect others from her fate. The road ahead wound through green hills and ancient forests, disappearing into the distance. Behind them, Inverwick stood as testament to what they'd survived. Ahead lay Glasgow and the hand of taking, another entity of hunger wearing a different face. And beyond Glasgow, other cities, other artifacts, other battles in a war that might never end. But wars were won one battle at a time, one saved village at a time, one healed mind at a time. Agnes Drummond, the girl who'd looked into the Eye of Inverwick and survived, was ready to begin. The curse had broken her, but it hadn't destroyed her. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. Not defeating the entity, but proving that humanity could endure even the most intimate violations, could transform trauma into strength, could choose to fight rather than succumb. As the coach carried them toward their next confrontation, Agnes closed her eyes and felt the residue of 23 minds that had poured through her during the ritual. They were part of her now, voices in her expanded consciousness. But instead of overwhelming her, they gave her strength. She wasn't alone. She would never be alone again. And neither would anyone else who fell victim to these ancient hungers, not if she could help it. The Eye of Inverwick was destroyed, but its legacy lived on not as curse, but as catalyst. From horror had come purpose. From sacrifice had come resolve. The darkness had touched Inverwick and been defeated. Now it was time to take that victory and spread it like light into the world's shadowed corners, wherever the cursed artifacts waited to prey on human weakness. One eye down, 4 more to find. And a lifetime to spend ensuring no one else would suffer as Agnes Drummond had suffered. It was enough. It had to be enough, because the alternative was unthinkable. So, dear reader, you've journeyed with Agnes Drummond through her transformation from an innocent minister's daughter to something far more complex, a guardian against horrors that prey on human consciousness. But her story is just beginning. The Eye of Inverwick lies shattered, but 4 more artifacts remain scattered across the world. The heart of desire, the hand of taking, the tongue of speaking, the crown of being. Each one hungers in its own terrible way. Each one waits for the curious, the greedy, the desperate. Now, I want to hear from you. Did this story chill you to the bone? Drop a comment below and tell me, Which episode disturbed you the most? Would you have looked into the eye if given the chance? What location should Agnes and Alistair hunt the next artifact? If you enjoyed this descent into Scottish Gothic horror, smash that subscribe button. More cursed tales are coming. More artifacts to discover. More villages hiding impossible secrets. I promise to keep bringing you stories that will make you question whether knowing the truth is worth the price. Share this with someone brave enough to handle it. And remember, some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Some knowledge, once gained, can never be forgotten. Some eyes, once met, change you forever. The fog is lifting over Inverwick, but elsewhere in the world, new mists are gathering. New merchants are selling their wares. New boxes are being opened. Will you be watching when the next eye opens? Until the shadows call again, subscribe, comment your location, and sleep well tonight if you can. The darkness thanks you for your attention.